My, my love affair with tall buildings started in 1961. I was 26 years old. I just finished studying in Manchester, and I got a Henry Fellowship to do a master's degree at Yale University. I'd taken what was then a budget airline, which was Icelandic Air, and I went from London to Manchester, took off from Edinburgh. It stopped at Reykjavik on the way to refuel. I ended here in New York, and it was wow. I mean, it was just impossible to describe the impact of this city at that time. There's a book by Robert Hughes called The Shock of the New, and for me, it was the shock of the new on steroids. I mean, it was just unbelievable. All the classical buildings, the Seagram, Chrysler, Empire State, CBS, Lever House, but just the extraordinary explosion. So, from New York, I started the course at Yale, and that was headed out by Paul Rudolph. And it was fine until it came to a project for a tall building on a site, a corner site in New Haven. And I felt really comfortable with all the projects up till then, but a tall building, I thought, I need an engineer. And so I approached Paul Rudolph and said, I need an engineer to work with. Anybody who knows Paul, the idea that the architect is not the master and does the building and then kind of hands it out for engineers to make it stand up and work. So, despite his prejudice, to his credit, and he was an extraordinary individual and a great teacher, and I'm grateful to him and others at Yale, he produced an engineer, and for me it was a transformative experience to work alongside at the creative edge, and I felt truly empowered, and that model has informed the subsequent practice. But the outcome was a design that challenged the conventional idea of a tall building, which is a central core with a kind of ribbon of usable space around the center core, and the center core obviously containing structure, circulation, and services. And instead, out of that process was a reappraisal of the tall building. It was a series of rectangular loft-like spaces, free of columns, on the long edges looking out, and on the smaller edges fragmenting the traditional core and stacking those alongside. And 18 years later, it was Bob Stern, a colleague, who observed that the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, which had been mentioned earlier, was inspired by that student project. It was made possible. And since the Hong Kong Bank, which was the built reality of that student project, we've explored many, many variations on that theme. As you've heard, tall buildings that breathe, to be healthier, to reduce energy, tall buildings with gardens, with diagrids, with new forms of vertical transportation. And over that period, I've become aware that public opinion has moved in many ways, I wouldn't say against tall steel and glass buildings, but somehow you get the impression that if instead you were building a lower rise, building in the suburbs, and it had a wooden structure, that somehow it would be more sustainable, it would be greener, and it would be better. It would be kind of good. Well, it's interesting if you look at the data, and if you can imagine a map of the east coast of America, and it's been, I think it was 2013, two Berkeley researchers using household records tracked the carbon imprint. And so if you can imagine this map and the key to it, high carbon is bright red, and then it moves through orange and yellow to the lowest carbon, which is dark green. Look at this map, and it's mostly all red, orange, bits of yellow, and there's a tiny speck of dark green, and that tiny speck is Manhattan. And the reason that it's the lowest carbon, by a magnitude, I mean half the carbon imprint of the suburbs, is because it's dense, it's walkable, it's compact, it has good public transport, less dependence on the private car, centralized services, and as you heard, we've been very privileged to contribute a number of buildings which have been trying to push the boundaries. And when I say we, I would start off by those who commission, and there are a number of those who've commissioned our buildings here tonight, and I'd like to express our gratitude for their confidence, for their patronage. And if I move on to those who build, and I was on a building site this morning, and every time I actually go to a building site or I go to a factory where things are made, which are assembled, it's really stating the obvious, but these tall buildings are literally handmade, and I get this incredible sense of wonderment that this kind of giant cantilevers thrusting into the sky, that they're human, it's kind of mortals. And then if we move to those who legislate and who perpetrated the extraordinary New York grid, which I think has to be one of the greatest urban inventions. And finally, the design teams, and many colleagues are here today, architects obviously, engineers, and many specialists. So really, it's on behalf of the collective we that I'm delighted and honored to accept your award. Thank you. Thank you.
Here tonight, but most especially Norman Foster, in this extraordinary building and space that he designed and was developed. In fact, this is our second year being here because last year we honored David Levinson of L&L Holdings when we almost inaugurated the space very early in its social life and in the life of the city. So, thank you very much. I think I know what I want to say tonight in any case, and that is I'm so pleased that Norman Foster could be with us tonight because we so admire the work that he does here, and as you can see, along Park Avenue, and you, I know, are all familiar with his work because many of you have worked on it in your own careers. And so we want to honor him tonight with the Making New York History Award. And this is something, it's actually our 20th year that we've been in the business of skyscraper history and doing events like this and giving awards. And the award is called Making New York History, Notable New Yorkers. And Norman Foster is a citizen of the world, a global architect, but for tonight in particular, he's an honorary New Yorker, and we're very much partisans here of New York, although we come from all over, and New Yorkers do come from all over. So tonight to celebrate him in particular, and I'm holding this book, but I can't hold the microphone and the book at the same time. But what you see here are the notable New Yorkers. That's all right, I got it. from a book of 1898 that celebrates the many professions that come together in New York, but especially also the building professions. And that's what we do at the museum. We try to represent the various aspects of design, development, building communities that create the great tall buildings of the world, but also especially of New York. And so our award usually has to do just with New Yorkers, but tonight we're broadening our scope in order to celebrate and as we're calling him tonight, the current king of Park Avenue, because here, there, and soon to be another one, the dominant height of kind of the accrued vertical height of new buildings on Park Avenue belong to this man. And so to celebrate that, we have two speakers tonight who are peers of Foster and Partners. And because this is the king of Park Avenue and we have Norman Foster, we're thinking of peers in the professional sense, not in the British sense. But Jamie Von Klemperer, who is the chairman of the Skyscraper Museum, and another of our trustees, Bill Baker, will offer toasts through the evening. So if you have a glass or you'd like to get a glass in order to raise it, we ask you to join that. So those remarks follow my brief tribute to Norman and the passion that he's brought to his work of the Skyscraper. And he really stands as someone who marks the history of the Skyscraper. And I become a student of his on my treadmill watching YouTube videos. And I've consumed hours and hours of his talks from 40 years ago to today. And I really strongly recommend to you the one that he gave at the Architectural Association back in the early 1980s, when the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank was still in the design development stage. And in that, all of the features of his buildings today, in that speech, in that building, all of the features, whether it's the radical reinvention and rethinking of the typology of, in the case of that building, removing the core from the center, opening up ground plane to people, to create a vertical village of open socializing spaces in tall buildings, is a consistent theme. But to see 40 years ago, Norman Foster saying all of those things with kind of the youthful rebelliousness that was a part of the time and a part of his approach to architecture is really, truly inspiring. So now I'm going to hand the microphone over to Jamie Von Klemperer, who is a super tall architect himself, the chairman the president of KPF, and the chairman of the Skyscraper Museum, who wants to say a little bit about Norman's career.
Thank you, Carol, and thank everybody for coming tonight. It's the only way the museum stays alive and keeps going is these yearly events are really important to us, and so this success will keep us, in exhibits and publications for quite some time. So, I want to thank also Carol for keeping this little institution of 28 years going, and it really is about education. It's education for school kids, students, and Carol's a serious scholar. She always reminds us that we have a duty. The little spot in Battery Park City is one we hope everybody will visit from time to time. So, but more important, let me thank, as Carol has, Sir Norman Foster for coming and agreeing to make this event possible. Here, there. It's a tribute, of course, exhibited by all of the clients, friends, colleagues, etc. here. And though your accomplishments around the world, whether London, San Francisco, Riyadh, Toronto, I mean the names of cities keep going, it's really your contributions to New York, which in this moment have risen to a stage of great fruition. It started a long time ago, but now to count the number of towers and other buildings that you're working on, and therefore our great institutions, our great banks, our great medical establishments, our transit hubs, our great publishing houses, and that kind of versatility of interest in programs and how buildings work is really laudable. One of my colleagues used to say, and he was spent a lot of time in London, Foster is like Christopher Wren. His steeples are all over the place. Only they're a little taller and they're all over the world. And that was kind of apt. So I'd like to think about that. But I think one of the things that most of us architects appreciate about your work is the simultaneous attention to careful detail, but also to making a city and the larger, even global or planetary implications of the building. And when I was a student, as I mentioned earlier, back in 1979 in Cambridge, the pilgrimage that we made to the Sainsbury Center and the Ipswich building taught us these lessons firsthand. And so it's amazing to see what's happened since then. And now as 270 Park rises to completion, we're just outside our view here, in our view here, we see the same kind of love and care for both the small and the large, the city, the tall, but also the materials and the way things go together. So let's just reflect that it's through the infusion of great talents from around the world that has kept New York in its architecture and many other disciplines. It's kept us competitive, it's kept us on our toes, and it's kept us in search of excellence. So you're setting a standard for us. And so whether we are your partners or your competitors or city planners or appreciators of other kinds, we can really thank you for that infusion of energy. And we can also say with great confidence and agree with each other that to have you in our midst is to have one of the greatest architects of his time. And so we want to raise a glass. Maybe that comes afterwards, Carol?
If anybody has questions, raise one now.
Bill Baker, I'm the engineer in the room. Okay, and it's very appropriate to have an engineer with Norman Foster. Today we're talking about skyscrapers, the Skyscraper Museum, and it's also approximately the 40th anniversary of the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank. This mid-career project of yours that we all, the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank that we all made the pilgrimage to see and walk under and try to get into the security office to see the building. And at that time, in the last 40 years, I think you have, like, at this point, at least a dozen what we would classify as super tall, over 300 meters, towers that you've done, but on a remarkably consistent body of work. I'm from Skinner and Merrill, KPF, very large practices. It is very difficult to maintain consistent quality architecture in a large practice. And this is a very important thing that you've done. But I think part of the reason you've been able to do this is because I think your work is philosophically based. We call it like a refined Vitruvian aesthetic that's been adapted to the issues of our time. It's a practice that's focused on making places for people, but also expressing the technology of the construction and the craftsmanship of how it goes together. I think, and I want to point out that he has structural engineers on staff. He also has environmental engineers, sustainable engineering on staff to help him in his explorations of these things. And at this point, he's made a long list of very important projects. Commerce Bank in Frankfurt, a very seminal project that we competed on and lost. Of course, we all, Swiss Re, also called the Gherkin, or 30 St. Mary Axe, very important building, that explores the technology, the photonics, and the environment of tall buildings. And of course, here in town, the Hearst Tower, a very important building that came in that expresses its technology. We have this building right here. you know, with the transfers that are expressed, of course, Hudson Yards is at Hudson Yards, and very importantly, the J.P. Morgan Chase building, where there used to be an SO building, but Natalie Moore. Natalie's building. Anyway, Lord Foster and your firm, because I know a lot of your partners are here today, they produce important, serious architecture that makes the world a better place. So, this is to you, Norman. Cheers. Cheers.
We'll take pictures with the award as well, but we made this ourselves. And I promised Janie and everyone that they didn't really have to wear a silly hat, but we made these crowns as well of the buildings in New York. And there's some for lots of people here. If you'd like a photo op later to wear a crown, please do. The Milo Diadem is a magnificent Vassal's crown in comparison. So, Norman Foster, thank you so much for your contributions to New York City. You are an honorary New Yorker now, and we celebrate you as one of the notable New Yorkers and the awardees in a long line of very special people who have really put their imprint on the New York skyline.